place of your brother. I'm going to ask you to sit down this time because I may want to move. I want to make it theatrical today. We're going to turn this mic up a little bit. Did you turn it up? Maybe I'm not. Let's try that. How's that? Okay. I want to talk to you today about a scene from my favorite of all musicals. And it may be one that you don't know, but I bet you a lot of your parents know it. How many people here have heard of the show Les Miserables? Oh, lots. Oh, one. Okay. It's my favorite. I love the music. I love every song from it. It's a story, actually, about the suffering of common people at a certain time in French history. And that's why it's called the suffering ones, the miserable ones. But it's really, at its heart, it's the story about a man, one man and his journey towards finding redemption in his life and meaning and love. And that man's name is Jean Valjean. Very French. It's a French story. You say that after me. Jean Valjean. Okay. He's the main character. Did I go off again? Yes. Oh. I bet you my batteries. Would you give me 2 batteries, please? A certain time in life, the batteries just go. So, at the beginning of the show, we see Jean Valjean having spent 19 years doing hard labor in prison. Any guesses as to why he was in prison?
Stole something?
He stole something, but what he stole was a loaf of bread so that he could feed his sister's starving child before he died. Thank you. Get this right. And now I have to put them in the right direction. Thank you, Will. Okay, I think are we on? Okay. So, yeah, it was such a terrible time. He had to steal a loaf of bread just for this child to live, and he got 19 years in prison. And so his 19 years are complete, and he's going to be released on parole. Parole is when you've been in jail. You're not set free, but they let you out to see if you can live in the world with good behavior. And his parole officer that's going to be keeping eyes on him is his arch enemy, the man who has just tormented him for all those 19 years. And he's got a French name too, Javert. And Javert lets him know that he's going to keep his eye on him, and if he makes any mistakes, he'll end up back in prison. So Jean Valjean leaves, but he has nothing. He's been in prison for 19 years. No place to stay, no money, and he's sort of wandering the streets. And a saintly old clergyman, like your rector, well actually, it was the bishop, but saw him and had compassion on him, and so he takes him into his home for the night. And Jean Valjean's lying there, and he sees all this silverware, this candelabra and goblets. Well, the temptation is just too much, because he has nothing. So he grabs a few pieces of silver, and he runs out into the night. And guess what happens? Huh? He gets caught. Not by Javert, his enemy, but by the police. And you know, he looks pretty much, he looks like a street person. He doesn't have any clothes or anything. And they say, you know, what are you doing with this? And he said, this was a gift from the good bishop. And they go, yeah, right. Come with us. So they drag him to the bishop's house, and they wake the old man up, and they tell him the story, and he says, and he's right. They were a gift. And he says, in fact, monsieur, I'm surprised you left the most expensive gift behind. And he gave him another piece. And of course, Jean Valjean is dumbfounded. And then the bishop thanks the officers for doing their duty and sends them off. And when they are together alone, he challenges Jean Valjean to use that silver to turn his life around and to give his life to God. And he walks out from that house a changed man, because he realizes that if the bishop had not said anything, he would have spent the rest of his life in prison. And he vows in that moment to live a life for others and for God, and to make a difference in the world. So he assumes a new identity. He takes that money from that silver and he opens a factory. He hires workers. He even becomes the mayor of the town. He's doing pretty good. But he had done one thing else wrong. In doing that, he knew he had to stay away from Javert. So he broke his parole. When you're on parole, you always have to report back to the officer who's looking out after you. And he had gotten rid of Javert, hidden from him. And Javert has spent all that time searching for him because he wants to get him back in jail. And one time he's walking through town and he notices Javert standing over there. Javert doesn't know it's him because he's all cleaned up. He didn't look like that in prison. He had a beard and all that kind of stuff. He's got mayor's clothes on and chains and stuff. And he notices Javert standing there with a handcuffed man before a judge. So he sort of just walks over to listen to what's happening. And he quickly discovers that Javert thinks he has caught Jean Valjean. It's a case of mistaken identity. Now, you need to know he never referred to Jean Valjean by his name. He only called him by the number he was given in prison. 24601. That was his number. And so he hears Javert tell the judge, I have recaptured 24601. And he needs to be locked up until he rots. And then all this stuff starts going through Jean Valjean's mind. He first thinks, oh my goodness, this could be my ticket to complete freedom. If Javert thinks he has put me in jail for the rest of my life, he won't be looking for me anymore. And I can go on, I can give a good living to all these factory workers who work for me, I can be safe in my own home. And then he looks at the man and he realizes this is an innocent man. And if I do this, he will suffer for the rest of his life the way I did for 19 years. So what do you think he does? He says, because first of all, he says, you know, he sees the dilemma. He says, if I speak, I'm condemned. If I stay silent, I am damned. In other words, if he speaks up, he's going to jail. If he stays silent, he feels like he's turned his back on God. What do you think he does? Well, he does what everyone does in musicals. He sings a song. And he reflects on who he is. The song is called Who Am I? And he says, you know, who am I to condemn this man to slavery? He's done nothing wrong. He just looks like me. And he says, how will I ever be able to look in the mirror again if I do this, even though I keep my freedom? And he wrestles back and forth with this. And then, yes, you're right, he speaks up. And he walks over to Javert and he says, who am I? Javert just doesn't recognize him. Who am I? I'm Jean Valjean. And he says, so Javert, you see it's true. This man bears no more guilt than you. Who am I? 24601. On a high B flat that we'll hear later. And I won't tell you what happens after that. You're going to have to rent the movie. Or better yet, go to see the show.
Or read the book.
I was just here in Portland a little while ago. And the reason I share this story with you is because I couldn't help thinking of it when we heard that gospel reading today. It's a very famous one. We hear it a lot. Jesus asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they say various things. Some of them think he's our patron, John the Baptist. And then he says, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter blurts out, remember what he said? You are the Messiah, the anointed one, the Son of God. And usually when we hear this, you know, we'll hear a sermon about how important it is to remember who Jesus is and so forth. And I was thinking this year, though, I felt like duh, we know that, don't we? I mean, that's why we gather every week to worship, is that we know Jesus is the chosen one of God, the Holy One. And I always feel that every gospel story has a challenge for us. And it dawned on me that the challenge might be for us is to ask that question about ourselves. Just like Jean Valjean did. Who am I? Have you ever thought about who you are, or you just take it for granted? I guarantee you, if you haven't yet, as you get older and older, there are going to become times so you think, who am I pretending to be, and who am I really? Because we all are tempted sometimes to wear masks, not literally like Halloween masks, but we'd like to cover things up in our lives. We like to pretend for other people that we are richer than we are, or we're smarter than we are, or we are more popular than we are, or whatever it is, we're stronger than we are. We want to put forth a certain image instead of claiming who we really are with all of our gifts and all of our warts and everything in between. And so this is what Jean Valjean did. He had to ask himself, who am I? And he realized that in order to be his true self, he had to claim his true self. And part of who we are as a community of faith are followers of Jesus, and people who know him to be the Messiah. But we know, like Jean Valjean, he says at one point, when he comes out from the bishops and he made that vow, he says, thinking back on it, he says, my soul belongs to God, I know. I made that bargain long ago. God gave me hope when hope was gone. God gave me strength to carry on. And that's when he says, I'm 24601. And that's true for all of us, isn't it? God is always there when hope is gone to give us hope and give us strength to journey on. And so my hope is that we'll all journey on, no matter what age we are, and ask ourselves at 10, and at 15, and at 25, and at 45, and at going on, 105. Who am I? Who am I? As a follower of Christ, as a follower of the Messiah, a child of God, an inheritor of the kingdom of heaven. And knowing and understanding what Jesus meant, that there's a sacrifice to pay for that. That character, Jean Valjean, would have understood Jesus very well when he said, you must take up your cross and follow me, because when you own who you are, you may have to pay a price. Jean Valjean was willing to sacrifice his freedom in order to be true to himself. And so that's our call as disciples. So, may you join all of us in the search for our true identity as children of God, loved and upheld. Amen.
Amen.